That night, He-Wol forgot her dead husband's face for the first time. Instead, in her dream, a strange old man sat before her. His white beard hung down to his chest, and his eyes flickered like flames. The old man didn't speak. He simply tapped the ground 3 times with his finger. Thud, thud, thud. Then he opened his mouth. Buy the house people have abandoned. Even if they mock you, bury all your fortune there. At the bottom of the well, your name waits. He-Wol's body froze as she asked, why must it be a haunted house? The old man didn't smile. He only said this one last thing. That house is not a house of ghosts. It's a house where people buried people. When He-Wol opened her eyes, dirt covered her palms. She had only touched the ground in her dream. Yet the smell of wet earth lingered between her fingers. That morning, He-Wol truly heard the name of that haunted house, Songit House, the house of the All. But why an All? The villagers tried to stop He-Wol. Every night, there's a sound like an awl boring through wood. If you see your reflection in the well, it follows you. Everyone who bought that house was ruined within 3 months. He-Wol asked the merchant, how much for that house? The merchant laughed openly. That house costs not money, but your life. But the price was absurdly cheap, just enough to match her entire fortune. The moment she heard that number, the old man's finger tapping echoed in her ears. Thud, thud, thud. On the day she stamped the deed, village elder Manbok whispered one last time, Madam, that house is not empty. The owner still lives there. He-Wol stamped the seal and answered, then I'll just live there together. The moment He-Wol opened the door to Songit House, a sound came from inside. Tock, tock. Someone was knocking first. The gate wouldn't open by itself. It only opened as much as He-Wol pushed. Through that gap, cold air burst out, as if winter itself was breathing inside the house. The moment she stepped inside, a sound came from the inner quarters. Tock, tock. Someone was tapping beneath the wooden floor. A thin, steady sound, like an all-piercing wood. Manbok fled outside like he was running away. He-Wol walked alone toward the inner quarters, holding a candle. The courtyard soil was damp even in daylight, though it hadn't rained in a long time. Then something stepped on something beneath her foot. Bone. Precisely. A small finger bone protruding through a crack in the floor. He-Wol's breath stopped. But strangely, the first emotion she felt wasn't fear, it was anger. The words from her dream, people buried people. That phrase was now emerging as evidence in this house. That night, He-Wol laid out her bedding in an empty room. The moment she tried to sleep, a whisper came from beside her ear. Take me out. The next morning, He-Wol met someone at the marketplace, a man carrying a bundle of books on his shoulder. His name was Don. He called himself a wandering book peddler, but his eyes were too clear. Don looked at Songit House and immediately said, this place is a house sealed by geomancy. It was He-Wol's 3rd day at Songit House. During the day, it was quiet enough to seem trivial. Sunlight only reached one side of the courtyard. The places where light didn't reach always felt cool, like evening. The house had been empty for a long time, but rather than traces of emptiness, there were stronger traces of someone who had lived there and left in a hurry. The threshold edges were worn smooth. In the kitchen corner, faint smoke stains remained. But strangely, the rooms that should smell most of people had no smell at all. Instead, one scent filled the entire house. The smell of wet earth. A damp, cold smell, as if the ground itself was breathing. He-Wol went down to the marketplace. She needed to buy rice and firewood. But more importantly, she needed to check people's mouths. What stories were people swallowing, and whether her dream was hidden inside those stories. At the marketplace entrance, He-Wol saw an unfamiliar man. Someone who cast shadows even in sunlight. A strap hung over his shoulder like suspenders, with an old book bundle dangling below. While selling his wares, he looked at the dirt under his feet more often than people's faces. The dusty smell unique to someone who had walked a full day's journey. And mixed with it, the sweet moldy smell that only comes from paper. When he opened a book, the paper cried out with a rustling sound. That sound strangely reminded He-Wol of echoes from a well's wall. The man glanced at the rice sack He-Wol was holding and quietly asked, that rice, are you taking it to Songit House? He-Wol hesitated. How did you? The man brushed off his hands casually. In the marketplace, rumors walk faster than people. He introduced himself as Don. He said he was a wandering book peddler, but his speech was too refined. His eyes were too clear, almost coldly sharp. He-Wol deliberately pretended to be calm and asked, you must have heard the haunted house rumors too. Don seemed to smile for a moment, but his eyes didn't smile. Rather than a haunted house, it's a sealed house. Sealed? Yes. Someone made it so that what's inside can't get out. And at the same time, people from outside can't easily get in. Don followed her all the way to Songit House. He stood at the gate for a long time. He measured the height of the wall with his eyes, ran his palm over the pillars, lightly dug into the courtyard soil with his toes. Whenever the wind blew, The vines on the wall rustled. That sound was like someone chewing dry leaves with their teeth. Don rubbed the soil between his fingers and smelled it. This soil holds water, even though it hasn't rained in a long time. Hewol muttered to herself about the wet earth that had stuck to her palm in the dream. Don continued. Here, it's not that the earth gets wet. There's something that makes the earth wet. Hewol forced a laugh. Are you talking about ghosts? Don shook his head. Not ghosts. Human intention. That's scarier, isn't it? Ghosts have no reason. But people have reasons. Just then, children's laughter came from beyond the wall, then suddenly cut off. Whenever children saw Songit house, they always closed their mouths like that, as if adults had taught them, don't speak of this house. Hewol took Don to the village tavern. When you mix among people, those with less courage talk more. Hewol deliberately paid extra for a drink and quietly asked the tavern keeper, Songit house. Why do they call it Songit house? The keeper glanced around once, then lowered her voice. Every night, there's a sound like hammering nails or boring through wood. Talk, talk, talk. That sound. If you hear it from far away, it's fine. What if it's close? The keeper's lips trembled. If it's close, the sound feels like it's stabbing inside your chest. That's why it's called Songit House, the house of the all. An old man eating at the next table interrupted. A widow bought that house, they say. When Hewol raised her eyes, the old man's hands were shaking. The sound of his spoon striking the bowl rang thinly. The old man swallowed his drink, swallowed his dry saliva, and only then spoke. That house isn't a house. It's a bill. A bill? A place where someone wrote down the price to be paid. And waits. Dorn asked his first question. 20 years ago, what happened in that house? The old man fell silent for a moment. The longer the silence, the more something lives inside it. It was the year the magistrate changed. The old man started to say more but closed his mouth. Just then, the sound of hoofbeats came from afar, and the shoulders of everyone in the tavern shrank at once. On the way back to the house, the sun was setting. The western sky was red, but Songit House didn't turn red. That house didn't accept the color of the sun. It just stood in its own color, a damp gray. The moment she tried to enter through the gate, Dorn grabbed Hewol's sleeve. Madam, let's make one promise. What is it? Dorn's voice lowered. Tonight, even if someone inside the house calls your name or whispers, don't answer. The moment you answer, it's not a conversation. It becomes a contract. Instead of answering, Hewol listened to her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, like someone tapping beneath the floor. Dorn looked once more at the well in Songit House. The well was dark even in daylight. And from that black hole, a faint glimmer rose. Even though it wasn't moonlight, Dawn said. Let's start with the well. The well is the house's throat. The well knows what this house swallows. Hewol took one step toward the well. At that moment, the sound came again from beneath the floor. Talk, talk. This time, it was clearly the house calling Hewol. That night at the well, what Dawn pulled up was a hairpin tangled with hair, and the name carved on it was Hewol. The well was empty. Yet standing at the well's edge, her throat dried first. What should dry is not the person, but the well. The well had no water, yet somewhere it was wet. Dawn lowered a rope and examined the well's walls. The moss caught between the stones seemed dried and twisted, but when touched, it was cold and slippery. When Hewol shone the candlelight, the inside of the well grew darker. The more light entered, the deeper the darkness became. A strange place. Then, something small glittered at the bottom of the well. Dawn threw down a hook. Clang. The sound of metal striking stone. After fumbling several times, the feeling of something catching traveled up through the rope. Dawn slowly pulled it up. Metal covered in dirt. A hairpin. And tangled wet hair clung to the hairpin. The hair was black and heavy, as if it had been soaked in water for a long time. The moment Hewol received the hairpin, coldness stabbed her palm. Not the coldness of metal, but the coldness of bone pulled from water. Dawn traced the characters on the hairpin with his finger. Hewol. Hewol's lips stiffened. That's my name. Dawn shook his head. Rather than being yours, it's the name this house has been searching for. As soon as those words ended, wind was sucked into the well. The candle flickered. The light briefly turned Hewol's face black, then brought it back to life. In that moment, Hewol was certain. This house wasn't waiting for a person. It was waiting for a name. Hewol forced out a breath and said, Then, someone took my name. Dawn's voice grew lower. They must have. Or perhaps, you came back to reclaim that name. That night, Hewol couldn't sleep. The house grew noisier at night. From pillars that only had wind sounds during the day. At night, small frictions could be heard. Like someone touching wood with bare hands, their fingernails scraping. Hewol pulled the blanket up to her neck. Then, very close by, a whisper came. Give back my name. The sound wasn't from inside the room. It was as close as if it came from between Hewol's hair. Hewol sat up, looking at the floor, in the middle of the room. Though not a drop of water had been spilled, wet footprints were stamped there. Not just one footprint. Small footprints, large footprints, twisted footprints. And those footprints didn't walk straight. As if fumbling for direction in the darkness, they continued in a stumbling line. The footprints went out the door, crossed the wooden floor, crossed the courtyard, and headed toward the well. He-Wolf followed barefoot. The wooden floor was cold, having consumed the night air. Her soles tingled. The courtyard soil was softer than during the day, as if someone had turned the soil during the day. Her feet sank slightly. Standing before the well, He-Wolf found herself lowering her head without realizing, because from inside the well, a very low song could be heard. Arirang, arirang. The voice was a woman's, and that voice seemed to laugh while crying. The song didn't continue. It sang 2 verses, then the breath cut off. Sang 2 more verses, then cut off again. Dawn came running. Madam, don't listen, He-Wolf asked with only her lips. Is there someone inside? Instead of answering, Dawn picked up the rope. The hand touching the rope trembled very slightly. Then, from inside the well, a crack sound came. It sounded like someone clenching their teeth or biting into stone. Dawn swallowed and said, if we go down, the way back will be different. He-Wolf gripped the hairpin. The hairpin's tip pricked her palm. Not sharp enough to draw blood, but it hurt sharply, as if pricked by determination itself. He-Wolf looked at the well's entrance and said quietly, I have nowhere to return to anyway. And she grabbed the rope. Below, the song stopped. Instead, breathing could be heard. Someone at the bottom of the well was waiting for He-Wolf to descend. Chapter 5. The Song Below the Well, and the First Revelation. Dawn was somehow more cruel. Before the terror of night lifted, before the reason of day arrived, that time in between, the time when people are weakest. He-Wolf stood before the well. The sky was still dark, only the eastern edge faintly pale. Dawn tied the rope firmly. Man-Bok stood far off, rubbing his hands together and muttering, don't do it. Don't. The village shaman, Wilson, appeared late. For someone who performed rituals, she wasn't loud. Rather, she was quiet. Quiet in a way that was more frightening. Wilson tapped the well's wall with her palm. Here. It's not water that has pooled. It's memory. Dawn frowned. Wilson looked at He-Wolf and said just one thing. If the voice you hear inside calls your name, don't answer. He-Wolf grabbed the rope and began descending. The moment her feet touched empty air, her body felt light. That lightness somehow felt heavy. Along with the creaking of the rope, the air inside the well struck her face. The smell changed. First, the smell of wet stone. Next, the smell of old iron. And at the very end, a faint fishy smell mixed in thinly. Not blood, but the smell when old water and people mix. He-Wolf descended, touching the wall with her fingertips. The stone was slippery, and her palm felt wet. But when she looked at her palm, there was no moisture. The feeling of being wet yet not wet. Like water that only exists in dreams. The deeper she went, the louder the sounds echoed. From above, Dawn asked, are you all right? That voice struck the well's walls and shattered. All right. Right. As He-Wolf neared the bottom, the song from below the well began again. Arirang. That voice drew closer. The closer it got, the less clear it became. It fractured more. The voice's owner, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time, seemed to sing not with pronunciation, but with breath. The moment He-Wolf's feet touched the bottom, it wasn't soil but stone that was stepped on. Hard stone. Cold and slightly uneven. Somewhere on the bottom, there was also a faintly hollow feeling. When she held up the candle, the well's bottom was wider than expected. Space enough for one person to crouch and survive. The very fact that such a space existed below a waterless well was abnormal. When He-Wolf moved one step, from beneath her foot came a thin crunching sound. She thought it might be bone fragments, but it was pieces of broken roof tiles. Not thrown down from above, but traces of someone below breaking them deliberately. The moment she touched the wall, a sentence caught on her fingertips. Letters carved into stone. Words read by fumbling with fingers. Those who enter this house. If you are greed, you die. If you are truth, you live. That sentence looked like a warning, but it actually felt like a trap. Greed and truth aren't easily distinguished from a person's perspective. He-Wolf held the candle forward. One stone slab on the floor was slightly lifted. Between the slab's gaps, darkness breathed. And from there, breathing sounds came. Human breathing. The breathing wasn't fast. It wasn't dying breath either. Rather, breath that had been held for a long time. Then, realizing someone had come, carefully exhaled. Dawn's voice trembled from above. Don't open it. If you open it carelessly. He-Wolf didn't answer. Instead, she pressed the stone slab with her fingertips. The stone slab wasn't heavy. It moved too easily, as if someone had been waiting for it to be opened from above. Day by day, little by little, pushing the stone upward. When He-Wolf lifted the stone slab, cold air burst out from inside. In that air was the smell of people, sweat, earth, old orbs, and living breath. When she shone the candle, inside, not a corpse, but a living old woman, crouched there. The old woman's eyes closed, avoiding the light, then slowly opened. Her pupils were yellowed and dried, but alive. The moment the old woman saw Hewell, she spat out her first words in a hoarse voice. "Is the magistrate still guarding that house?" Hewell's throat tightened. "Who are you?" Instead of answering, the old woman grabbed Hewell's wrist with her dry hand. That grip's strength was unbelievably strong. A hand with only bones left gripped Hewell with the strength of the living. The old woman spoke, almost growling. "Take me up and tell that bastard Seopil-1 hasn't finished paying his debt yet." When Hewell tried to step back, the old woman whispered, Are you Hewell?" Hewell's heart sank. The old woman continued speaking. "That name died here once. That's why this house called that name again." From above, Dawn urgently lowered more rope. "Madam, hurry. People are coming." As if those words were a signal. Suddenly, sounds came from above the well. Footsteps. Many people's footsteps. Footsteps on soil, the metal sound of armor. Short gasping breaths. Someone looked down from the well's edge and said, "So you were there." It wasn't the magistrate's voice, but it had the magistrate's scent. The scent of power. The scent that treats people like objects. Hewell extinguished the candle and held her breath. Darkness filled the well again. In that darkness, the old woman whispered one last time. 20 years. It's been over 20 years since I hid here." And from above the well, a cold command fell. "Cut the rope." Chapter 6. The magistrate's visit. Money, pity, threats. Songit House was dark even during the day. Since Hewell started living in that house, strangely, it felt as if the time when the sun rose over the house had shortened. As if the sky itself was avoiding this house. That day was even more so. The day she discovered the old woman below the well at dawn. The day the rope nearly got cut. The day she barely saved her life and came back up. Her body had returned alive, but her ears still held the well's echoes. "Cut the rope." Those words kept scratching inside her ears. The old woman Wilson from below the well was hidden in the passage beneath the floor. From her body came the smell of old earth and medicinal herbs. The fact that she smelled like a living person was somehow more frightening to Hewell. You can deceive yourself that ghosts don't exist, but you can't deceive yourself about a living person. Dawn examined the house here and there. He sealed window cracks with paper, covered the wet footprint marks on the floor with ash. Ash suppresses smells and hides traces, but there was one thing that couldn't be perfectly hidden. Air. Air cannot lie. When people are hiding, the air inside the house grows subtly warmer. If that warmth stimulates the nose of a powerful person entering from outside, it's over. From afar, the sound of hoofbeats could be heard. Clip-clop, clip-clop, growing closer. The footsteps of guards, the sound of armor clashing. Outside the gate, it suddenly grew quiet. The moment sound stops is most frightening. When something stops, it means the main topic is about to begin. The sound of knocking on the door. Thud. Thud. Unlike Songit House's talk-talk, this wasn't a request but a notice. When Hewell opened the door, wind entered first. The wind was thin and cold like a blade. Through that wind came the smell of horse sweat, leather, and a stronger smell mixed with those. The smell of incense. The incense used by those in power always overwhelms people. "I breathe more expensive air than you." That's what that smell says. Magistrate Seopil-1 dismounted his horse with a smile. The smile was so gentle that the back of her neck felt chilled. Gentleness means the blade has been well sharpened. The magistrate paused before stepping over the threshold. He looked at the vines tangled on the gate, then lightly touched one leaf with his fingertip. The leaf fell with a rustling sound. At that sound, even the guards held their breath, because the magistrate spoke quietly. "For a haunted house, it's neater than I expected." Those words weren't praise. They meant, "You cleaned up in a hurry, didn't you?" Hewell spoke without bowing her head. "It's my house. I should keep it tidy." The magistrate's eyes narrowed briefly. He didn't see Hewell as a person. People normally look at eyes. The magistrate looked not at Hewell's eyes, but behind her, at the courtyard. Toward the well. He looked there longer. The moment his gaze touched the well, Hewell's insides hollowed out, as if the well's darkness had transferred into her chest. The magistrate slowly entered the courtyard. The sound of his shoes stepping on soil was strangely distinct. Crunch, crunch. That sound seemed to say, "I know what you're hiding." Dawn quietly came out and bowed. The magistrate looked at Dawn and paused briefly. A person's cultivation shows more in posture than clothing. The moment the magistrate saw Dawn's posture, he realized that he wasn't an ordinary peddler. The magistrate deepened his smile slightly. "A book peddler?" Dawn answered calmly. "Yes." The magistrate nodded. "Good. Literate people are always one of two things." Dawn asked. "Two things?" The magistrate's words flowed smoothly. "Either they know what sells for a high price, or they know what dies for a high price." Hewell felt sweat forming on her palms. Even on a cold day, sweating happens because the body converts fear into heat. When people are afraid, they grow hot. To keep that heat from rising to her face, He-Wol exhaled slowly. The magistrate gestured one guard to step back. Those in power know how to use people like decorations. You don't need to hear what I say here. That's how they dismiss people. And the magistrate pulled out his first card toward He-Wol. Money. The magistrate pulled a sheet of paper from his sleeve. The paper was thick, the ink dark. Rustle. The sound of paper unfolding. With that one sound, the air inside the house grew colder. The magistrate said, "I'll buy this house for double the price." Before He-Wol could answer, the magistrate added, "Right now, I brought the deed and seal with me." What does it mean that the magistrate brought the seal in advance? This house was already not a subject of negotiation, but of collection. He-Wol said quietly, "I cannot sell it." The magistrate's smile froze in place. There's a moment when a smile breaks. That moment is very brief. But in that brief moment, true nature shows. In the magistrate's eyes, person disappeared. Only calculation remained. The magistrate pulled out his second card. Pity. Those in power use even pity as a weapon. He suddenly sighed and lowered his voice. Living as a widow. How hard that must be. I know that too. He-Wol's insides churned. If he truly knew, he wouldn't say it that way. Those words weren't comfort, but a declaration. I know your weakness. The magistrate spoke like a kind elder. Living in such a haunted house, you'll see phantoms every night. People will gossip. At the market, they'll undercut your prices. He tilted his head slightly and smiled. So my offer is the way to save you. He-Wol sensed something in the magistrate's tone. The magistrate said, "I'll save you," but he was actually saying, "Come into my hand." He-Wol answered briefly, "I know my own way to survive." The magistrate fell silent briefly. Then the third card, threat. The magistrate spoke very gently. "Widow, do you know what's easiest in this world?" When He-Wol didn't answer, the magistrate said it himself. Making one person disappear. After those words ended, even the sound of wind in the courtyard seemed to cease. The house was holding its breath. The magistrate moved his steps toward the well. He-Wol's heart dropped down to the well's bottom. If he approached the well, it felt like the well would react. The well was hiding memories, and memories sometimes leak out as sense. The magistrate looked down into the well and said, "This well has no water." He slowly ran his finger along the well's edge. Stone dust stuck to his fingertip. The magistrate brought that dust to his nose. He smelled it very briefly. In that brief moment, He-Wol's breath stopped. The magistrate's lips curved upward. "The smell of earth is strong." And he added, "When people live, the earth comes alive too." Did those words mean people are hiding, or were they just probing words? People like the magistrate don't check directly first. They check through the other person's reaction. He-Wol didn't react. She only maintained her breathing. She didn't even blink. Then, from beneath the floor, a very small sound came. Tuck. He-Wol's eyes almost wavered, but they didn't. Instead, the magistrate's ear moved. The magistrate heard the sound. The magistrate turned his head slightly to look at the floor. The moment his gaze pierced the darkness beneath the floor, He-Wol realized the magistrate might have already known when he came that this house wasn't a simple haunted house. Dorn stepped one pace forward. His voice was low and firm. "My lord, if you stand in a haunted house too long, you'll get sick." Outside the gate, the magistrate looked at Dawn. Those eyes were sharper than a blade. The magistrate said to Dawn, "What is your name?" Dawn said, "Dawn." The magistrate smiled. "Dawn, you seem like a literate man." And very slowly, he added one more line. "Literate men die because of literacy." He-Wol felt it. If Dawn spoke more here, it would be dangerous. The magistrate doesn't engage in verbal fights. When words are no longer needed, he moves people directly. The magistrate turned his gaze back to He-Wol. "Fine. I'll give you one last chance." He pointed his finger at the sky. In the western sky, the moon was faintly rising. The magistrate said, "Before the moon wanes, hand over the house to me." The magistrate lowered his words very gently. Gently lowered words sometimes choke the throat better. The magistrate turned and left one final statement. "If you don't sell, this house will become not a haunted house again, but a tomb." The sound of hoofbeats started again. Even after the magistrate left, the courtyard's air didn't clear. The incense smell remained inside the house, creating a lingering presence as if someone still sat there. The moment He-Wol closed the door, her hand trembled. When the door shut with a thud, the sounds inside the house grew louder once, as if the house was finally breathing. Dawn said in a low voice, "He didn't come to test us?" He-Wol asked. Then, Dawn looked toward the well and answered, "He came to gain certainty. And soon, he'll return with that certainty." Then, from beneath the floor, the sound came again. Tuck, tuck, tuck. This time, not far away, directly beneath He-Wol's room. And the sound wasn't a nail. Rather, it sounded like someone tapping the ground with their finger. He-Wol froze. Wilson's breath, swallowing air beneath the floor, seemed to be heard, very faintly. And at that moment, Footsteps came again from outside the gate. Not the magistrate's group, but another group's footsteps. Light steps. Not the trained military gait, but steps like peddlers. Dawn's face hardened. They're here again. This time it's not the magistrate. He swallowed and looked outside through the door crack. From beyond the wall, someone whispered, "Madam, can you protect that house alone?" That voice was kind. That's why it was more dangerous. The moment he opened the door crack, in the darkness, a pattern identical to the hairpin glittered. There was someone else besides the magistrate who knew that name. The afterglow of the government office drum echoed. People gathered. The sound of paper being pasted on the marketplace wooden board. Thud. It was just the sound of thin paper sticking, yet it sounded like people's fates being pasted together. The smell of ink came. Government office ink isn't the smell of books. It's the smell of judgment. He will read the paper. Songit House is an ominous sight. The resident must immediately report to the government office. Failure to comply will result in forced eviction and punishment. And below that, 2 characters precisely stamped. He-Wol. People glanced at He-Wol's sideways. Sideways glances are shallower than blades, but they stab more times. He-Wol endured those gazes. Then Dawn said quietly, "That's not law. It's his stage." The magistrate wanted to set up one bad person in front of the crowd. That way, people would side with the magistrate. Those in power always create crowds that way. Crowds believe they judge for themselves, but in truth, they are manufactured breath. He-Wol and Dawn went to the government office. If they didn't go, they'd become fugitives. If they went, they'd become defendants. There was no time to judge which was worse. The magistrate had already eliminated the options. The government office courtyard was cold. The stone floor, having consumed winter's energy, chilled to the bone. Cold feet were bearable. What was truly cold were people's gazes. The people gathered in the office yard whispered while looking at He-Wol. Those whispers burrowed into her collar like wind. The magistrate looked down from his high seat and smiled. That smile was more benevolent than yesterday. Benevolence is an expression that puts people at ease. An expression that puts people at ease is sometimes the most perfect trap. The magistrate said, "Widow, I don't want to torment you, but you entered an ominous sight. Ominous sights make people ominous. So I called you. To save you." In that word save you, He-Wol tasted cold metal, because saying I'll save you means you are in my grasp. The magistrate pulled his first string. Enticement. He said gently, "I know you have no money to buy a house. I'll arrange a new house for you, near the marketplace. A warm place. I'll make sure people no longer call you the haunted house widow." The crowd murmured. Someone made the face of what a good magistrate. That face was exactly what the magistrate wanted. When Dawn tried to step forward, He-Wol raised her hand to stop him. The magistrate was ready to explode the moment Dawn spoke. Those were such eyes. The magistrate pulled his second string. Division. The magistrate suddenly lowered his voice and spoke. "If it were just you alone, I wouldn't go this far. That man traveling with you, who is he?" This question wasn't for information. It was a question to shake her mind. The magistrate wanted to make her suspect Dawn. The moment you suspect your ally, a person splits in half. A person split in half breaks easily. The magistrate continued, even more sweetly. "What if that man is using you? Gold trinkets, ledgers, secrets from the haunted house. What if he keeps you by his side to get those?" When such words are spoken before a crowd, the crowd's eyes pierce Dawn. If Dawn makes excuses, he becomes suspicious. If he stays silent, it becomes true. The magistrate had arranged the board so that any choice favored him. Dawn's breath grew long once. He-Wol glanced at Dawn's knuckles. Tendons had become clear on those knuckles. The hands of someone suppressing anger. The magistrate pulled his third string. Attack. He suddenly raised his voice. Songit House is an ominous sight. Every night there are sounds. Someone wails. Objects from that house bring disaster. The crowd's faces changed. Fear is contagious. Contagion begins first with gazes. The magistrate threw his final blow. "I must protect good citizens. Therefore, the government office will repossess Songit House." Repossess. The magistrate calls seize as repossess. That one word puts the crowd at ease. The magistrate isn't doing something bad. He's just organizing things. The crowd wants to believe that. He-Wol realized at that moment. The magistrate wasn't trying to buy Songit House. He was trying to eliminate Songit House without evidence. He-Wol said quietly, "My lord." The magistrate responded with a smile. "Yes. Have you changed your mind?" He-Wol raised her head. She looked not at the crowd but straight into the magistrate's eyes. "I ask you, if Songit House is an ominous sight, why do you want it so desperately?" This question was a blade. The magistrate's smile cracked very briefly. The magistrate quickly recovered his smile. Those in power change expressions swiftly. He said gently, "Want it? I don't want it. I'm clearing it away. Because it's dangerous." And the magistrate pulled out his final trap. He spoke as if bestowing mercy. "Fine. I'll give you until tonight. If you leave on your own, I'll preserve your dignity. But if you resist, the office will enter. When the magistrate raised his hand as a signal, a guard brought a bundle of documents. A seal was stamped on them. The seal wasn't ink-colored but red like blood. At that moment, Hee-wol heard a very small whisper from behind her. "Madam, there's someone in that house, isn't there?" The whisper came from within the crowd. Not the crowd itself, but the magistrate's people mixed in. The magistrate had already planted seeds among the people. The seed that someone is hiding in Songit house. Hee-wol's insides grew cold. Hiding Wolzen could now return as a blade. On the way back from the office to the house, the sky darkened faster. Hee-wol was certain the magistrate would strike Songit house tonight. Whether burning it with fire or dragging people out, he would do whatever it took to finish this. Dorn said in a low voice. "The time he gave isn't mercy," Hee-wol asked. "Then what?" Dorn's voice hardened. "He gave himself time to deploy forces." Then, near Songit house's wall, footstep sounds came. Light footsteps. Not the heavy footsteps of government soldiers, but footsteps of someone secretly approaching. When Hee-wol stopped, from beyond the wall, a very kind voice whispered, "Madam, before the magistrate devours you, why not make a deal with us?" The wind blew and leaves on the wall rustled. Within that rustling, metal clinked very faintly. Clang. The sound of metal like the hairpin. The moment Hee-wol looked through the wall gap, on the wrist of a man in the darkness, a badge with the hairpin pattern glittered. And he said, "We too have been searching for Hee-wol." Chapter 8. The Third Force's Deal. The man beyond the wall didn't suddenly reveal himself. From the darkness, only his words came first. Words are always like that. They stab the heart before the face appears. "Madam, the magistrate will move tonight." Whether those words were a warning or a threat. At first, it was hard to tell. Hee-wol pressed her eye to the wall gap. Two men in the darkness. They tried to look like marketplace people, but their hands were different. Marketplace people's hands are rough, their nails worn down. Their hands, though rough, were orderly. Hands that had gripped swords, or pulled strings. One man slightly raised his wrist. Moonlight brushed across it very thinly and glittered. A small badge engraved with the same pattern as the hairpin. Not metal light, but light cold as bone. "We too have been searching for Hee-wol." The phrase "we too" is frightening. The most dangerous thing in the world is when the enemy is not one but many. And more dangerous still is when those many want the same thing for different reasons. Hee-wol inhaled. The inhaled breath descended through her throat. Cold. When that coldness descended to her core, her mind actually became clearer. "Who are you?" Hee-wol asked. The man didn't smile. Kindness without a smile is more solid. "We have many names. At the marketplace, they call us a merchant guild. At the office, they call us errand runners. But to you, madam, I'll say it simply. We want to buy what came from that house." Hee-wol's fingers automatically gripped the hairpin. The hairpin's tip lightly pricked her palm. The pain was small, but clear like a signal saying stay alert. The man quietly continued. "What the magistrate seeks isn't the house. It's the papers buried beneath, the names, and the crimes." Those words were correct. Correct words put people at ease, but they also make people let down their guard. Hee-wol decided not to feel at ease. "What's the deal?" The man slid a small bundle under the wall. The bundle smelled of lamp oil. Fresh oil. Fresh oil means we'll use the night long. Tonight, Songit house will catch fire. Whether by the magistrate or his people, that house will become not a haunted house but evidence tonight. So we'll help you. The man pointed with his finger at two things. One was the bundle. Lamp, medicine, dry food. The other was the darkness beyond the wall. An escape route. "We'll create the path. You hand over the items. Ledgers, letters, hairpins. All of it." Hee-wol asked. "What's the price?" The man's answer was brief. "One name. We need to confirm whose name Hee-wol truly is." This wasn't a simple transaction. They hadn't come to buy objects. They'd come to buy a person. Hee-wol realized this. Dorn stepped one pace forward. His voice was low but straight as a blade's edge. "Why help us?" The man looked at Dorn carefully. That gaze examined not Dorn's face, but his shoulders, hands, posture, and said very quietly, "You're someone who reads, aren't you?" Dorn's eyes briefly hardened. The man added, "People who read all have similar eyes. When they see sin, their eyes hurt first." At that moment, Hee-wol was certain these men weren't a simple merchant guild. At least one of them carried the scent of the government. That scent wasn't incense. It was the smell of old documents, ink, seals. Hee-wol deliberately stalled for time. If you stall, the other party talks more. When they talk more, their true purpose leaks out. "Why specifically tonight?" Instead of answering, the man pointed beyond the wall. Far off, toward the government office, torches were moving. Fire can be seen from afar. Fire approaches wearing the face of law. The magistrate has mobilized office soldiers under the pretext of clearing an ominous site. He'll bring the crowd too, because crowds move through fear. Hee-wol's mouth went dry. When the crowd comes, rumors come. When rumors come, people become more cruel. With just the words ghosts appear, stones fly. He-Wol steadied her breath and said, "There's only one thing I can give." The man waited quietly. He-Wol pulled out the hairpin. "This. I didn't possess it. I discovered it." The man's eyes glittered. "And the ledgers? I don't have them." He-Wol briefly shifted her gaze to Dawn. "The one with me has them." The man nodded. "Good. Then do this. Tonight, when we signal from behind the wall, go down toward the well." "Why the well?" The man answered briefly. "The well can hide, the well can save, and the well can also kill." After those words ended, the men beyond the wall disappeared soundlessly. What remained was the smell of lamp oil and anxiety scratching at the nape of her neck. When He-Wol returned to the house, Songget house was too quiet. The quietness was thick like breath before a storm. Then it came. From beneath the floor, tuck, tuck, a sound like hammering nails, yet like tapping out a contract with fingers. He-Wol swallowed. "Tonight isn't time to judge who's on my side. Tonight is a night of who catches me first." Someone shouted from outside the gate. "The office has arrived. Open the door." And simultaneously, from beyond the wall, a short whistle signal rang out. Chapter 9. The night the crowd became a weapon. The knocking on the door grew louder. Thud. 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 Each time the door shook, dust fell. Dust is the bones of an old house. When those bones fall, it also means the house is enduring. Outside, someone was reading the decree. The smell of ink seemed to ride the wind inside. Ominous sight. Songget house. Resident must vacate. Forced execution upon non-compliance. He-Wol didn't open the door. If you open the door, conversation begins. When conversation begins, they speak of law. The moment they speak of law, people feel no guilt even while holding stones. Dorn lowered his breath. "If we open the door, it's over." He-Wol nodded. Wilson was beneath the floor, covering her mouth with her hand. If that one breath sound was heard, tonight wouldn't be a ghost disturbance but a crime of concealment. From outside, the magistrate's voice came, or rather, the voice of someone the magistrate sent. A shallow voice of power, imitating the magistrate's tone. "Open the door. We'll preserve your dignity." At those words, the crowd murmured. Crowds like the word dignity, because dignity is the prettiest wrapping paper for quietly killing others. He-Wol looked outside through the window crack. 10 torches, 20 torches were lighting the courtyard. The faces of people beneath the firelight were all one color. The color of firelight. Fire erases faces. Fire changes people from individuals into a herd. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Ghosts appear there, they say." Then someone else responded, "The widow pulled something from the well." Rumors had already hardened like evidence. Evidence is made not from paper, but from people's beliefs. Dawn grabbed He-Wol's arm. "We go now." The moment those words ended, from beyond the wall, a short whistle sounded again. The third force's signal. He-Wol turned her body toward the well, away from the door. At that moment, the sound of the door breaking came from outside. Crash. The sound of wood splitting always contains screams. Wood screams. And people, hearing those screams, strike harder still. Torch smoke poured into the house. Smoke choked the throat first. Eyes stung. Noses burned. Smoke is fire's preview. One soldier shouted, "If there are ominous objects, bring them out." The moment they call it objects, people also become objects. Then, those eyes she'd seen at the tavern. The man who'd been watching He-Wol at the marketplace moved within the crowd. He whispered to the crowd, "The well. She hid it in the well." The moment those words fell, the crowd's gaze converged in one direction. When gazes converge, feet soon converge. When feet converge, people collapse. He-Wol ran to the well. The soil beneath her feet sank coldly. Dawn followed. From inside the house, a shout came. "Set it on fire." The sound of fire catching is quieter than expected. It starts small, then soon swallows large. Fire resembles greed. When He-Wol reached the well, a man from the third force extended his hand from atop the wall. In that hand was rope. Now, that one word flew like a blade. He-Wol reached for the rope but hesitated. Right then, from behind, the magistrate's voice came. The magistrate had come himself. The incense smell rode the wind, mixing with smoke. "Widow." That one word killed all other sounds. Even the crowd briefly stopped. The voice of power cuts the crowd's breath. The magistrate walked slowly. When firelight lit his face, he was smiling. A person who smiles even in fire is more frightening than fire. The magistrate didn't speak. Instead, he raised his hand. With that one gesture, soldiers prepared to snatch the rope. He-Wol realized whether the third force's rope or the magistrate's hand. What she grasped now wasn't salvation but choice. Whichever choice she made, there would be a price. Then, from inside the floor, tuck, tuck. That sound could be heard even within the fire. The house tapped something one last time, and Wilson's breath burst from beneath the floor. Breath she'd been holding finally leaked out once. That small breath caught in the crowd's ears. Someone shouted, "There's someone." She hid someone. The magistrate commanded in a low voice, "Drive her into the well." And the crowd surged toward the well all at once. Hewell's toes caught on the well's edge. The well's edge was slippery. Firelight touched stone and glittered. That glitter looked like water, though it was a waterless well. The well always wore water's face, whether to deceive people or to draw people in. The crowd surged. When human bodies push human bodies, breath is pressed. When breath is pressed, judgment extinguishes. A crowd with extinguished judgment is almost like fire. Hewell couldn't step back or dodge sideways. Her toes caught on the well's edge. The magistrate's incense smell reached right behind her. The magistrate spoke from very close. "I gave you a chance." And at the end of those words, he buried a warm smile. "So now, it's my turn." Hewell looked at the rope, the hand of the third force atop the wall, and before her, the well's black mouth. There was only one choice. Hewell turned her body and jumped into the well. The rope burned Hewell's palms. Rope grows hot from friction. That heat scraped her skin, calling forth blood. But there was something hotter than blood. The desire to live. The duty to survive. Hewell slid down into the well. From above, sounds poured down. "Catch her. Cut it. Pour more fire." Those words shattered into echoes and struck the well's walls. The air inside the well was cold, though she jumped from flames. The moment she descended, her skin shrank from coldness. Coldness awakens people, and when awakened, fear becomes more vivid. As Hewell descended, she felt it. The well wasn't a simple hole. The deeper she went, the walls felt like hands. Not stone, but something brushing past Hewell's arms. The bottom drew near. Then from above, someone shouted, "Cut the rope." Hewell's chest hollowed. That sentence, the same sentence heard from below the well before. A thunk sound came. The rope shook, and Hewell's body briefly lifted, then fell. Hewell tumbled on the bottom. The stone floor's coldness pierced her spine. Her lungs collapsed once, then expanded again. When breath entered, a fishy smell stabbed her nose. There was no candle. Without light, yet a very faint glitter could be seen. Metal fragments embedded somewhere in the well's wall. Or eyes. Hewell fumbled to find the hairpin. Cold metal caught on her fingertips. The moment she gripped the hairpin, strangely, her heart calmed a little, like confirming this is still in my hand. Then, from a crack in the floor, a small sound came. Tuck. Hewell held her breath. That sound came even below the well. The sound wasn't only from above the well. It was the heartbeat of the entire house. In the darkness, Dawn's voice came. "Madam." Dawn had also descended. His voice was close. His breath was rough. Breath that had consumed smoke. Dawn grabbed Hewell's arm and lifted her. That hand was trembling. "Wilson?" When Hewell asked, Dawn gritted his teeth. "She's up there." She must have been dragged away. Those words coldly split Hewell's insides. If Wilson was caught. The magistrate now held a person in his hand. When you hold a person, you hold their mouth. When you hold their mouth, truth is severed. Dawn fumbled the wall with his hand in the darkness. "Here it is." He found the edge of the stone slab. When Hewell placed her hand on it, the stone slab was slightly lifted. This wasn't the first time. This was a door someone had already opened and closed many times. Dawn said in a low voice, "We escaped through the underground passage. The well is connected." When they pushed up the stone slab, air rushed out from inside. Cold air. But in that air was the smell of a living house. The smell of old paper, candle wax smell, and the smell of hidden secrets. Hewell and Dawn entered the passage. The passage was narrow, the walls wet. When touched, they were slippery. Small sand grains stuck to fingertips. The floor was stone, so it made sounds. Thud, thud. Afraid that sound might leak to the well above, the two walked almost on breath alone. At the passage's end, faint light could be seen. Not light itself, but a crack where light could leak through. Before that crack was a door. Nails were densely hammered into the door. The nail heads glittered like small eyes in the darkness. The moment Hewell saw those nails, goosebumps rose. Songed house's talk sound wasn't a ghost sound heard from outside, but the sound of someone inside hammering this door shut. She was certain of it now. Dawn pulled out one nail. Screech. As the nail came out, the wood cried. When a door cries, the entire house cries. Between the door cracks, the smell of paper rushed out thickly. That smell wasn't the smell of books. Books are paper made to show the world. This paper was paper made to hide from the world. Dawn opened the door just slightly, and from inside, a faint light shone. Neither moonlight nor firelight. A hanging scroll on the wall. Inside the scroll, a scholar's face could be seen. Hewell's breath stopped, because that face resembled Dawn too much. Dawn spoke almost in a whisper. "Now, we cannot turn back." Hewell barely parted her lips. "Who are you?" Dawn raised his head. His eyes wavered for the first time. That wavering wasn't fear, but the wavering of long-hidden guilt. "I am." Just before he could continue, from behind in the passage, toward the well. People's sounds came. Someone was also descending into the well, and that voice was the magistrate's voice. You may pour more fire. If smoke descends to the bottom, breath will extinguish first. Smoke began seeping into the passage. Breath grew hot. Eyes stung. Time was running out. Dawn gripped Hee-Wol's wrist tightly. Now, into the door. The moment Hee-Wol turned back one last time, from the well's darkness, a glitter. The man wearing the hairpin pattern badge was descending. The third force. They too had descended into the well. That man said quietly in the darkness, "Madam, keep your promise. Show us the true owner of Hee-Wol." The door closed. Nails began being hammered again. Tock, tock. This time, not from outside but from inside. Who was sealing this door again? When the door closed, the world's sounds diminished. The crowd outside, torches, footsteps, shouts. All of it grew thin across one door. But instead of thinning, something else became clearer. Breath sounds. When people breathe, darkness feeds on that breath and grows. Inside the door was a small room. The room had the distinct smell of a space made to hide. Sweet mold smell from old paper. Hardened candle wax smell. And ink smell. Not the smell of books but of records. Not paper meant to be read, but paper that meant death if discovered. A scroll hung on the wall. The scholar's face in it resembled Dawn. Resembled so much that saying resembled was inadequate. The eye shape, jawline, even the hardened habits around the mouth were identical. The moment Hee-Wol saw that painting, her throat burned. Not from smoke, but because reality became too certain. Dawn lit a candle. The light flickered small, licking every corner of the room. Wherever the light touched, wooden boxes stood in rows. Small papers were pasted on the boxes. Everything else aside, the writing was clear. Grain ledger. Processing records. Memorial draft. Regarding Seo Bill 1. Hee-Wol thought to herself. The reason the magistrate guarded this house wasn't the house. This could no longer be hidden. This room was a room that choked the magistrate's throat. Dawn opened one box. Papers were bundled together. The string was old and brittle. When touched, it made a rustling sound. Dawn unfolded a paper. From between the papers, not wind but time seemed to escape. Then, from outside the door, the nail-hammering sound came again. Tock, tock. This time, not someone closing the door, but someone closing the door more. The sound of strengthening the seal. Hee-Wol looked toward the door. Who? Dawn also seemed to have the same thought, his lips hardening. Very faint smoke seeped through the door crack. Smoke destroys eyes first, then destroys breath. The magistrate said he'd send smoke down to the bottom. Those words weren't a threat but a method. Then in the darkness, one quiet clap came. Thud. It wasn't a real clap. Not the sound of palm striking palm, but the sound of fingers tapping leather. And that familiar, kind voice. The voice of the man who'd proposed a deal beyond the wall. A fine room. When Hee-Wol turned the candle, a man stood in the room's corner. It was impossible to know when he'd entered. He was someone who knew how to enter without leaving breath sounds. He revealed his wrist. That badge. The badge engraved with the hairpin pattern no longer looked like a merchant guild's mark. It was a government mark. Precisely. A mark used in places deeper than the office seal. An inspector's mark. The man said quietly. We're not a merchant guild. We're people who move like a merchant guild. Dawn asked in a low voice. The Suhianbu? The man didn't smile. Answers without smiles are closer to truth. If I speak the name directly, someone else dies. The man took one step closer. From his clothes came not incense smell but paper smell. The smell of a government archive. The smell of someone who handles records. We've been watching Seo Bill 1 for a long time. But people like Seo Bill 1 don't die easily for crimes of stealing money. Because there's a bigger string behind him. Hee-Wol swallowed. Then you. The man answered briefly. We came to cut that big string. Dawn held up a paper. Aren't these ledgers and letters enough? The man shook his head. Not enough. Why? The man looked at Hee-Wol and said. We lack a name. The name Hee-Wol. Hee-Wol's heart sank. The man continued. Seo Bill 1 didn't leave his crimes on paper. He left his crimes on people. Even if you kill a person, if their name remains, you get caught again. So he erased names. The man's voice lowered. 20 years ago, the woman who died in that house was named Hee-Wol. You said. Dawn's eyes hardened. The man added one more line. That woman's name wasn't just a simple name. That woman was a witness to the great crime Seo Bill 1 hides. And that witness's name also remains in central records. Hee-Wol's mouth dried as she asked. Then what about me? The man said. You are the place where that name came back to life. Only when someone calls that name again, can this case be tied to the great crime. At that moment, from outside, the magistrate's voice came as an echo. Down to the well, through the passage, down the walls, that voice descended. Open the door. If you don't open it, the fire will descend to the bottom. The smoke grew thicker. Eyes stung. Throat burned. Hee-Wol's lungs grew hot. Dawn gritted his teeth. Wilson was caught. The man nodded very briefly. I know. Those words were indifferent. Indifferent, and therefore more frightening. They calculate even people being caught as part of the board. He Wol said in a low voice. Then will you save us? The man answered briefly. We'll save you. But the method of saving, you must choose, madam. The man pointed to one box. There, the memorial draft is there. The paper Seobil One feared most. Then, looking at He Wol, he said, take it and go out to the crowd. Read it before them, and Seobil One is finished. Then the man cut her off. The probability of surviving to the end is low. Dawn's hand trembled. From smoke, from anger, or from resolve. The man said one last very important thing. But even with low probability, if we succeed just once, we can cut even the big string behind Seobil One. After those words ended, a very small sound came from the room's corner. Thud, thud, thud. He Wol's entire body froze. That sound was the sound from her dream. The sound of the old man tapping the floor 3 times. The candle flickered greatly once. And from the room's corner, where no one had been, someone's low whisper came. Now is the time. Return. The name. He Wol swallowed. The owner of this house wasn't a ghost, but perhaps someone who became a house while protecting truth. Dawn looked at He Wol. His eyes crumbled for the first time. From within that crumbling, true words emerged. That woman was my mother. My mother He Wol died trying to preserve my name, and I returned to reclaim that name. Smoke descended further. The magistrate's footsteps approached from the passage. Thud. Thud. The sound of power descending. The inspector man presented the final choice. One of two. Before breath extinguishes here, take the memorial draft outside. Read it before the crowd. Or die quietly here. He Wol gripped the hairpin. Her palm hurt. That pain was proof of being alive. He Wol said quietly, I'll go out. At that moment, the nail hammering sound outside stopped. Instead, the sound of ripping the door. Crash. The magistrate had descended himself. Just before the door broke, the inspector man extinguished the candle and whispered, if you go outside, the crowd won't save you. The crowd is fire. And the door opened. The magistrate's face smiled within the firelight. When the door opened, outside was fire. Torches shook. People's faces were torn by firelight. The crowd moved like one body. One body doesn't think. One body pushes forward on instinct. Magistrate Seobil One stood at the passage entrance. Even in smoke, he'd shed his incense smell. Incense is a mask for those in power. But tonight, no mask was needed. The magistrate spoke from very close distance. You resist to the end. That voice was low and composed. People who do cruel things with composed voices don't waver. Dawn held the bundle of papers in his arms. The memorial draft, ledgers, letters. Those papers weren't heavy, but the names written inside were so heavy. Dawn's shoulders seemed to sink. The magistrate reached out his hand. Hand it over. Before Dawn could answer, He Wol opened her mouth first. The line was short. If you speak long, crowds don't listen. Crowds only consume short sentences. Seobil One. 20 years ago, you threw He Wol into the well. The crowd's breath briefly stopped. The name He Wol split the air. Names become blades. Especially dead names are sharper. The magistrate's eyes briefly turned cold. He smiled and said, a mad widow speaks of ghosts. You all saw, didn't you? This woman is ominous. The crowd murmured. Murmuring can easily change back to violence. Then, the inspector man stepped forward from within the crowd. He didn't loudly announce his identity. There was no need. He showed only one thing. The badge. The hairpin pattern badge. The moment the badge glittered in firelight, several soldiers instinctively straightened their postures. Power recognizes power. The inspector man said in a low voice. Read it. That one word pushed Dawn's back. Dawn unfolded the paper. The sound of paper unfolding. Rustle. That sound strangely sounded like it was gripping people's throats. Dawn began reading. Numbers from the ledger. Amounts of grain. Missing amounts. Dates. Seals. Processing records. Humans written not as people's names but with the word processed. The crowd's faces changed one by one. Faces where fear turned to anger. Faces where anger turned to doubt. Faces where doubt turned to certainty. The magistrate noticed that change. The magistrate is only strong when the crowd is on his side. When the crowd wavers, those in power pull out stronger weapons. The magistrate shouted. Those papers are false. Those are treasonous writings. The moment those words fell, Dawn unfolded the memorial draft. That paper was different. Not numbers but sentences. In the sentences were great crimes. Royal grain embezzlement. Connected names. The bigger hand behind Seobil One. This wasn't a village crime. That's why the magistrate raged more wildly. The magistrate drew his sword. The sound of a sword being drawn is always thin. Shing. With that thin sound, Human life grows thick. The magistrate rushed at Dawn. At that moment, Hewol stepped forward. Hewol had no sword, but she had the hairpin. Hewol raised the hairpin and said, "This hairpin came from the well," and very briefly added, "together with the name Hewol." When those words ended, wind blew from the well's direction. The torches shook greatly once. People instinctively looked back. The well stood in its place unchanged. Yet that day, the well looked like a mouth. Mouths don't speak. But before mouths, people recall their sins. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Then that woman really died." Someone else cried out, "The magistrate killed someone?" The crowd's anger now turned not toward ghosts but toward the magistrate. Fire only needs to change direction. Fire isn't about essence. Fire's direction is the problem. Seeing the crowd turn their backs on him, the magistrate pulled out his final move. He pointed at Hewol and shouted, "Seize that woman. She stole evidence. She's the traitor." Several soldiers tried to move, but the inspector man said very low, "Stop." At that one word, the soldiers stopped. At this moment, true power was revealed. The magistrate briefly froze. That freezing was fear. The magistrate gritted his teeth and lunged. Then it happened. The ground near the well sank with a very small sound. Crunch. The sound of earth collapsing. For 20 years, someone had dug, blocked, opened, and closed beneath the well. That ground was already empty inside. The magistrate's foot slipped. One stumble, and the crowd instinctively stepped back. The magistrate tried to grip the ground, but his hand gripped empty air. At that moment, he had to trust not law but his own body for the first time. But it was too late. The magistrate fell toward the well. He didn't fall into the well. The ground beside the well collapsed and pulled him toward the well. The magistrate screamed, "Save me!" That sound wasn't the voice of power, but just the voice of a person. The crowd, hearing that sound, didn't move. The crowd had already finished judging. Once fire changes direction, it doesn't return. The magistrate looked at Hewol one last time. In those eyes wasn't anger, but unbelievable terror. "Is this a curse?" Then, Hewol answered very quietly. The answer was brief. "Not a curse, but a record. The record you left pulled you down." Whether the magistrate completely disappeared or died, no one saw for certain. Behind the firelight and smoke and crowds' backs, only the ground grew quiet again. The inspector man nodded to the soldiers. "From now on, the center will handle this." The moment those words fell, the magistrate's people lost their strength. Strength comes not from swords but from legitimacy. When legitimacy breaks, swords also dull. Dawn came. Where fire had extinguished, cold air entered. When smoke escaped, Sungit House looked like a house again. But now people knew that house wasn't a haunted house, but a tomb that hid truth. And that tomb had finally opened its mouth. Days later, a small sign was erected in Sungit House's courtyard. Hewol opened a small village school there. Dawn taught children to read. Wilson, the Wilson they thought had been dragged away, returned alive by the inspector's hand. Her body was thinner, her eyes harder. Hewol stood before the well. The well was still dark, but that darkness was no longer darkness that swallowed people. Now it was darkness that held memory. Hewol whispered, "I returned." The name. Wind passed by very lightly, and it was heard. Thud, thud, thud. It was the dream's sound. But this time, not terror. It felt like a period mark. Hewol felt for the first time that her own name wasn't heavy.